On a quiet night in November 1978, 4 employees vanished from a fast food restaurant in Speedway, Indiana, leaving behind an eerie mystery that still haunts the town to this day. What began as a simple closing shift ended in a gruesome discovery. 4 lives brutally taken, and a case that remains unsolved over 4 decades later. Join me as we dive into one of Indiana's most chilling cases. This is the story of the Burger Chef murders. Hello friends, my name is Marcia, and this is Midwest Murders. In 1978, Speedway, Indiana was a small, close-knit town located just outside of Indianapolis. Known primarily for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, home of the famed Indy 500, the town was a hub of racing culture and community pride. At the time, Speedway was seen as a relatively peaceful suburban area where families felt safe and crime was not a prominent concern. The town's identity was largely shaped by its association with motorsports, drawing in tourists and racing enthusiasts throughout the year. However, the tranquility of the area was beginning to show cracks in the fall of that year, with 8 bombings occurring in and around Speedway during the first week of September, injuring 2 people and causing significant property damage. These homemade bombs were planted in random locations, including near homes, vehicles, and public areas, causing widespread panic in the small town. The Speedway bombings were eventually traced to Brett Kimberlin, a local man involved in drug trafficking. Kimberlin was accused of planning the bombs as part of a plot to distract law enforcement from his illegal activities, especially his connection to drug dealing. At the time, the town was already seeing an increase in drug-related crime, and the bombings only heightened the community's fear of violence. It was against this backdrop that 4 young people showed up to work their Friday night shift at a busy fast food restaurant located less than a mile from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. 16-year-old Daniel Davis was a junior at Decatur Central High School. An honor student and a member of the Civil Air Patrol, Daniel loved photography, reading books on history, and model airplanes. He planned to join the Air Force upon graduation. He was scheduled to get off work at 10 p.m. that evening, but because they were short-handed, he stayed to help out. He was not from the Speedway area and knew very few people there aside from his co-workers. He had his driver's license and typically drove to and from work, parking his Ford Pinto station wagon at the 24-hour Dunkin' Donuts next door. He was not involved in drugs and had no criminal history. Mark Flemons, also 16, was a sophomore at Speedway High School. He had an interest in karate and was known to use marijuana. He had struggled in school but seemed to be turning things around after he received probation for a shoplifting charge. Mark was not scheduled to work that night, but switched shifts with another employee who needed the night off. He had just returned to working at the restaurant 3 days earlier. Mark had been forced by his father to quit his job at Burger Chef 2 months earlier due to the fact that in an era when it was still not acceptable, Mark had been dating white girls he met at Burger Chef, and his father objected. 17-year-old Ruth Ellen Shelton was a junior at Northwest High School. She was on the honor roll, had an interest in mathematics, and planned to study the emerging field of computers in college. She enjoyed making macrame crafts and singing in the West Side Nazarene Church Choir. She lived with her parents on Lupine Drive in Indianapolis and was not known to use drugs. She had planned to quit her job at the Burger Chef, having submitted her resignation 3 weeks earlier. However, the manager asked her to stay on, and she agreed. 20-year-old Jane Freet lived alone in an apartment on Westbury Drive in Indianapolis and had worked for the restaurant chain for 3 years. She had recently been promoted to assistant manager. She knew a lot of people in Speedway and occasionally smoked marijuana. She was working the closing shift that night, 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. At approximately 12:30 a.m. on November 18, 1978, 17-year-old off-duty employee Brian Kring pulled into the parking lot of the Burger Chef after dropping his girlfriend off at home after their date. The lights were on, so he figured his co-workers were still inside cleaning up. Deciding to help them out, he walked up to the back door and noticed it was open about 3 inches, which was odd. When he entered, he realized the restaurant was empty, the cash register drawers were on the floor, and the manager's office was in disarray. Shortly after Brian arrived, another employee who had been scheduled to work the evening shift but was a no-show showed up. Reports differ as to what happened next, with Brian telling police this employee left the scene as soon as he was told a possible robbery had taken place. The unidentified employee, who was unaware that Jane had planned to fire him that night for using drugs on the premises, told police that he had called the restaurant about 11:30 p.m. and Jane told him to come in to help clean up. He says he arrived about midnight, and as he was getting out of the car, Brian ran out the back door of the restaurant, stating that no one was inside and there was no money. He stated he did go into the restaurant with Brian via the back door, where they found the restaurant empty and the cash missing. Regardless, at some point, Brian called the restaurant manager, who called the police. The time was nearly 1 a.m. Speedway police officer Jeff Dine, who was working dispatch that night, took the call about the back door of the Burger Chef standing open. When police arrived at the restaurant at 5725 Crawfordsville Road, they found Jane and Ruth's purses and jackets on the counter, 2 empty currency bags on the floor, and an empty roll of adhesive tape next to the open safe. They initially assumed the 4 had gone across the street to the Galaxy Disco for Teenagers, an under-21 club, since it was not uncommon for them to go over there and then return to the restaurant. The store manager arrived on scene and determined that $581 in cash was missing, but more than $100 in coins was left in the registers. When the 4 didn't immediately return, police believed it was a case of petty theft, with the assumption that the pilfered cash had been used by the 4 to go partying that night. There was no signs of a struggle, and with the theft theory seeming the most likely, police allowed the morning shift to clean the restaurant and open for business as usual on Saturday morning. When Jane's white Chevrolet Vega was found abandoned at 4:30 a.m., a half a mile from the restaurant at 5500 West 16th Street, and the 4 did not reappear Saturday morning, concerns grew. It became evident that the youths had been abducted while closing the restaurant for the night. Immediately, an anonymous donor posted a $10,000 reward for information on the whereabouts of the 4. The following day, Sunday, November 19th, at approximately 3:40 in the afternoon, Fred Hager and his wife, an elderly couple in neighboring Johnson County, called police to report they'd found 2 dead bodies while walking through their large, heavily wooded property just off County Road 700N. The location of the bodies was about a 35-minute drive from the Burger Chef restaurant. When police arrived, they found Ruth and Daniel lying together face down. Jane was located 30 to 40 yards south, and Mark was found 75 to 80 yards to the west. The bodies were taken to the Johnson County Memorial Hospital for autopsies. The medical examiner determined that Ruth and Daniel had both been shot in the back of the head with a .38 caliber firearm. It appeared that Jane had attempted to run and had been stabbed in the chest by someone apparently reaching around from behind, with a 5-inch blade that had broken off in her chest. Mark died from choking to death on his own blood due to head and facial trauma. While some reports state that he was beaten with a chain, the police report indicates he was found at the base of a tree, and they believe he was injured while running through the dark, dense woods to escape his attackers, possibly running headlong into a tree. All 4 were still wearing their Burger Chef uniforms. Money and watches were found on the victims, implying that robbery might not have been the sole motive for the murders. Since the area where the bodies were found was secluded and wooded, it was believed the killers knew the area. Some crucial errors were made early in the investigation that may have permanently derailed the case. As Buddy Elwinger, a Speedway police officer who worked on the case, later put it, "We screwed it up from the beginning. Not only was the restaurant cleaned and allowed to reopen, but no photographs were taken beforehand, effectively eliminating all potential evidence at the crime scene. Almost immediately, several sets of witnesses came forward with information. George Nichols and his girlfriend, who were sitting behind the restaurant trash area near the railroad tracks just before 11 p.m., were placed under hypnosis in order to recall what they had seen. They stated they were approached by 2 men who told them they had better leave because of vandalism in the area. Both men were white, one with an untrimmed full beard and mustache, the second one clean-shaven. These men had appeared on the railroad tracks, and the couple did not see or hear them approach until they spoke. Composite drawings and clay busts of the men were made from their descriptions. A mother and daughter stated they stopped by the Dunkin' Donuts about 10:45 p.m. and saw a junky, light tan or white station wagon with damage the length of the left side and a loud exhaust with 2 white males parked in the Dunkin' Donuts parking lot. As the mother went into the shop, the males tried to get the attention of the daughter and her friend, who ignored them. As the mother and daughter were leaving, they saw the car move from the Dunkin' Donuts parking lot to the Burger Chef parking lot, but did not see the men leave the vehicle. One man was described as having a beard and a mustache. Kurt Thomas told police that he was across the street at the Galaxy Disco and had plans to walk home with Mark. At 11:55 p.m., he left the disco and started toward the restaurant about 300 yards away. As he reached the grassy median that separated the shopping center from Crawfordsville Road, he saw the light was still on and two men, roughly the same height, standing at the counter. They were not dressed in Burger Chef uniforms. As he crossed the road and got closer, the two men were gone, and he walked around to the back of the restaurant to find the back door completely open. He leaned in and called for Mark several times but got no answer. Thinking he had missed his friend, he closed the door and proceeded to walk on home. He did notice Jane's white Vega in the parking lot. Police were never able to identify if these men were the same seen by all witnesses or separate individuals, and they were unsure if these men were involved in the abduction and murders or if they were possibly witnesses who may have additional information. Their identities have never been determined. As the investigation continued, police began receiving 200 tips per day through the special phone number that had been set up. They also came to realize that they had investigated the restaurant during a drug probe a few months before the abductions. During that investigation, an unidentified former employee told police that drugs were being sold out the back, and the earlier police investigation indicated that the restaurant's restrooms were being used as drop points for high-grade marijuana. Since two of the victims used marijuana, a drug connection could not be ruled out. However, the leading theory was that the four victims were kidnapped during a botched robbery, possibly after one of the victims recognized one of the perpetrators. Since Mark was covering for another employee that night and not scheduled to work, investigators began to speculate that perhaps he was the one who recognized the killers since they had not planned on him being there. Burger Chef offered a $25,000 reward, with another $1,000 added by another restaurant chain. Later, Burger Chef officials would claim that they were coerced by police into offering the reward. The community was sick, shocked, and angry over the murders. There was little public confidence in the police, as they had been unable to solve the recent bombings and took a stance of secrecy around the murders, refusing to release even the most basic information. Turf wars between the different police departments and agencies involved may have destroyed some of the most important clues. Speedway investigated the abduction, while Johnson County investigated the murders. Speedway police didn't take the necessary steps to preserve evidence at the site, and at the murder scene in Johnson County, officers from several different police agencies converged on the area and drove through places that some investigators felt should have been sealed off. Retired state police investigator Brooke Appleby told a reporter in 1988, "There were mistakes made by all departments involved, and I've always believed that with the proper investigation techniques, it might have been solved." Funeral services for Ruth were under the direction of the Flanner and Buchanan Speedway Mortuary, with burial in the Washington Park North Cemetery. Her artwork and needlepoint were displayed around her casket. Funeral services for Mark were under the direction of the Williams Funeral Home, with burial in the New Crown Cemetery. Services for Daniel were held in the Farley Man Road Chapel, with burial in the Mount Zion Campground Cemetery at New Lebanon. Funeral services for Jane were under the direction of the Hall Baker Funeral Home in Plainfield, with burial in the Roselawn Memorial Park at Terre Haute. Through the years, there have been some pretty viable suspects. Shortly after the killings, a man in a bar in Greenwood, Indiana, bragged that he had been involved in the killings. Police subsequently questioned him, but he passed a polygraph test claiming not to have been involved, and officers were unable to bring charges. The man did, however, provide the names of others who he suspected belonged to a fast food robbery gang, whom investigators also suspected may have been involved in the case. When following up on this lead, officers spotted a man in Franklin, Indiana, who bore a strong resemblance to the bearded man composite. Brought in for a lineup, the man shaved his beard, which he had had for the previous 5 years, the night before he was to appear. Another associate, named by the Greenwood suspect, who fit the description of the clean-shaven man, subsequently was imprisoned for other armed robberies of fast food restaurants. However, without confessions and without direct physical evidence tying the suspects to the murders, then County Prosecutor D. Charles Gantz refused to issue indictments for the two men, stating that he needed more solid evidence. Also considered was Roger Dale Stafford, age 27, a drifter who was suspected in 13 slayings across the country. He was placed in Speedway at the time of the murders by his wife. He was later cleared. Investigators continued to follow leads relating to possible suspects from Cincinnati, Milwaukee, Chicago, and Dallas. However, they were not able to find any more promising leads or to locate the evidence they believed would have been the most useful: the firearm and the handle of the knife used in the murders. In 1984, Detective Mel Wilsey of the Marion County Sheriff's Department received a call from Donald Forrester, an inmate at the Pendleton Correctional Facility. Forrester claimed to have been involved in the murders and was willing to confess in order to avoid his scheduled transfer to a notoriously violent state prison. Forrester was returned to Marion County, where he led police to the crime scene in the woods and accurately described the location and position of the bodies when they were found. He also knew about the broken handle of the knife, which was not widely publicized. According to Forrester, Jane's brother James owed money on a drug deal, so he and 3 other associates had gone to the restaurant to threaten her. But when Mark intervened to protect Jane, a fight broke out, during which Mark fell and hit his head on the bumper of the car. Believing he was dead or dying, Forrester and his accomplices decided to abduct and kill all the employees to eliminate the witnesses to their crime. Forrester claimed to have shot Davis and Shelton and gave the names of 3 men he claimed were responsible for killing Mark and Jane. He then led the police to a spot where he claimed he had thrown the gun into the river. However, a thorough search of the river did not find any weapon. Wilsey interviewed Forrester's ex-wife, who said that he had driven with her out to a wooded area shortly after the murders and retrieved several shell casings which he had flushed down the toilet. Wilsey got a warrant to search the septic tank of the house, which turned up several spent .38 caliber shell casings. After someone within the sheriff's office leaked details of Forrester's cooperation to the press, he suddenly recanted his confession and claimed it was all coerced. With no further cooperation from Forrester and no direct evidence proving he committed the murders, he was never charged. He died in prison in 2006 at the age of 55. Despite thousands of hours of police investigation, the attackers were never prosecuted, and the case remains officially unsolved. The Indiana State Police continue to keep the case open and have reportedly investigated the use of DNA tracing techniques developed since the initial investigations. In 2018, police released a photo of the knife, hoping it would jog a 40-year-old memory. Also in 2018, the Speedway community, as well as family and friends of the victims, raised money to plant 4 red oak trees to honor the victims. Each tree is adorned with a plaque with a short biography of one of the victims. The original monetary goal was surpassed within 24 hours, and the extra funds were used to install a marble bench dedicated to their family and friends. On November 10, 2018, 1 week before the 40th anniversary, a small dedication ceremony for family and friends was held at the memorial site at Leonard Park in Speedway. The 20 acres of dense woods where the victims were found were cleared to make way for the upscale Timber Heights subdivision. On March 24, 2024, the Speedway Burger Chef restaurant building was torn down. More information about the Burger Chef murders can be found in the book The Burger Chef Murders in Indiana by Julie Young. I have put a link below if you're interested. Over 4 decades have passed since the tragic night when 4 young lives were brutally taken in Speedway, Indiana, yet the case remains unsolved. The Burger Chef murders have left behind more questions than answers, haunting the families of the victims and the community itself. Despite countless theories, suspects, and ongoing investigations, justice has eluded those who seek it. As we reflect on this chilling case, we're reminded of the fragility of life and the darkness that can sometimes invade even the most peaceful of places. Could there still be clues waiting to be uncovered, or are the answers forever lost in the shadows? The spirits of those lost may never rest until the truth is finally revealed. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and may the truth reveal itself in the shadows.